Due to the recent revelations about Loki's admiration for rocks, I figured I'd make a video on everything we know about rocks today and telling you how strong I think this guy really was. Now, what we found out this chapter was, of course, that in Loki's youth, rocks had come to Elbaf seemingly for a specific purpose that we do not know. But in this time, Loki grew to really admire him and actually asked him to go and join his crew. Now, when he asked to join his crew, he was turned down, and Loki felt his only option at that point was to challenge Rox to a fight, which was obviously dumb, but Rox accepted the challenge and actually went so far as to draw a blade on him, even knowing Loki was a kid. To which Whitebeard actually got upset about that fact, saying, "You actually drew a blade on a kid," and Rox said, "Shut it, Newgate." Now, it's interesting because obviously we know he took in Kaido when he was a kid, brought him in as an apprentice, so that could have been Loki. But it's a situation where I think that he wanted to teach Loki a lesson, that if you're going to make a challenge like that, be prepared to die, be prepared to actually face the consequences. So it was a hard lesson, but he taught him that, and that's probably why Loki still reveres him to this day. Now, things that we do know about Rox is, of course, that he was the captain of the Rox Pirates, which included Big Mom, Kaido, Shiki, and Whitebeard, notably, among others. And they're basically known as like the most infamous crew. It's taboo to talk about them. Sengoku states that the Rox Pirates were a collection of individuals who came together on the pirate island of Full Lead years ago to make one big score. They were a fierce bunch, constantly killing one another within the group. In addition to their captain Rox, they also featured a young Whitebeard, Kaido, and Big Mom, and not even the surviving members of the crew want to tell the tale about it because they got along so terribly. The ambition of their captain Rox was to be king of the world. They opened hostilities directly against the world government like some kind of terrorist organization, but the government itself covered up much of their deeds. But back then, everybody had heard of them and the threat that they posed. This was due to a fateful event 38 years ago at God Valley. The Rox Pirates, the strongest crew in the world, were wiped out at an island called God Valley. According to the news reports, a rampaging force of evil that none had ever been able to stop had been taken down by a Navy Vice Admiral by the name of Garp. His name was heard across the world, and he was soon called a naval hero. Now, of course, we know the truth of this, that Roger was a part of this, but it was struck down from the record because Garp did have to work with pirates to win the battle. He had to team up with the Roger Pirates. That's also one of the reasons Garp himself doesn't even like talking about this. The other reason was that he protected the Celestial Dragons in doing so, because his moral compass spares no room for such a duty. The reason Garp would always refuse to take an admiral's position is because it would place him directly beneath the Celestial Dragon's command. It's only his accomplishments and his stature that keep him from being eliminated for his insubordination. So Garp is a made man. In short, this is the truth. In order to protect the Celestial Dragons and their slaves at God Valley, Garp joined forces with Roger there at that island, and they broke apart the Rox Pirates. That is the God Valley incident. Sengoku goes on to say Rox was so ambitious in his pursuit of being king of the world, he broke many of the world's taboos. There's no information available to the public about the Rox Pirates, and they only exist in the memories of a few good soldiers in our old generation. He then goes on to say he was Roger's first foe and perhaps his greatest. The captain was typically known only as Rox, but his full name was Rox D. Xebec, one of those rare pirates with the initial D, though he is no longer alive to speak on it. We get way more context way later in chapter 1096, where we actually see some of the actual events that take place at God Valley before the actual clash. Now, this sheds light on more clarity as to what really happened, because the way Sengoku frames it, it almost looks as if it was simply Roger and Garp taking on the entirety of the Rox Pirates, which we find out that's not really accurate. Now in 1096, we do see this interesting interaction between Kong and Garp, where Kong effectively begs Garp to go to God Valley, and Garp says, "I warned you not to mess with Full Lead, but who listens to me?" They've got plenty of security though, right? Why is there a fear? And basically Kong says, well, we didn't expect Roger to get involved. Now you could use this for some crazy scaling for some of the godsends, because they seem to be the only security that's actually there besides some fodder marines. It didn't seem like any admiral was there. We don't even know who the admirals were at this time period besides Sengoku, and we know for sure he wasn't there. So I talk about that a little bit in my Garling video. You can check that out. But effectively the Rox Pirates pull up and we get a little showing of their kind of crew dynamic, which Sengoku told us, they didn't get along at all, and we get to see that on full display here. Off screen, we hear Rox say the words, "You waste your time, Navy. Follow me, Rox Pirates," as he jumps off the ship. Now, we don't get to see what Rox looks like here as he jumps off the ship first. And we see Whitebeard say, "Not so fast, Rox. Who said I was your follower, fool?" And then Stussy says, "Oh, Newgate, not you too," to which Gloriosa says, "Don't be so pathetic, Stussy." We find out that they were both kind of fighting over Whitebeard. They both were in love with him. Big Mom says, "I assume it's finders keepers then. They'll be mine," seemingly talking about the devil fruits, but there is some kind of big treasure on this island that they're after. Could be the devil fruits, could be other things. Kaido says, but you can't do anything with them, Linlin. Him saying that kind of tells me what she's talking about is probably the devil fruits, because she obviously had eaten her devil fruit by this time. You can see Prometheus behind her. Whitebeard says, I just know that fool Rocks will lose sight of the goal. We have to be certain first. Shiki says, stop acting like you're the leader. I'll blow them all up. Big Mom says, let's just steal what we're after and scram. All these dreamers with their heads in the clouds. And Kaido says, I hear Roger's on the move. He's the last man I'll let. And somebody says, calm down, kid. Today's the day for the final fight. Captain John says that's the idea. Gloriosa says, we'll settle it once and for all. And we see what looks to be Silver Axe, and that may be Wang Zi at the bottom, or it could just be a silhouette of Rocks. We don't really know. But it's interesting that Kaido had some kind of interaction with Roger before this. We don't know the context behind that. Hopefully one day we will. At that point, Roger and Garp both show up. We see the God's Knights, and we get the full picture of who's actually there. So the image that we saw with Sengoku breaking it down wasn't completely accurate. Roger had his full crew with him. We also know that the God's Knights were there, and they'd be on the alliance of, the Marines and pirates against the Rocks pirates. Then we see that Garp brought his own fleet with him. He has Bogart in tow. We also know characters among the likes of Saturn were there. We don't know if the rest of the Gorosei were present, but there's also another little detail that talks about there were more than just the Rocks pirates that were showing up. There was a ton of infamous pirate crews all pulling up at the same time. So that means that there's a ton of variables on this island that goes far beyond Roger, Rocks, and Garp. Other context that's very important is that Big Mom was actively going for these devil fruits, wasn't really actively engaged in the main fight, so we don't even know if she was actively part of the fight. We also know her and Kaido obviously escaped at one point. That's when Kaido got his devil fruit. So it's not even a clear picture of who specifically was deadlocked into a fight, aside from obviously Rocks, which we do get a little teaser of Rocks actually fighting at the end, where Roger calls out to Rocks, wait Rocks, and Rocks says, out of my way, Roger, and you see Conqueror's Haki flowing from the island. Now, what I assume is that, of course, Rocks will have Conqueror's Haki, but of course, this actually looks like it's probably more than likely a clash between Rocks and Roger. Given that there's a clash, and he says, get out of my way, it just makes sense that they're probably clashing in the middle at this moment. With this, we actually have a little bit more insight through Road to Laugh Tale's breakdown of Rocks Xebec, where they call him Roger's strongest adversary and Roger's most formidable foe. Right, now these statements are extremely important because effectively what they would mean is that anybody Roger's ever fought, Rocks would be the strongest, which would be an argument for him being the top one in the verse, especially if he did fight Garp and Roger 2v1 at a certain point. There's arguments and potential ways you could try to get around this, but it's a really good statement for him. It's one statement that could get him past Whitebeard, given that Whitebeard was an adversary for Roger at times. And if you take the statement that Whitebeard was the strongest man, and the statement I prefer to use, the strongest pirate, which he attained well before the Great Age of Pirates, which means well before Roger died, and we get it actually revealed to us even in his Wano V regard, which was during the Odin flashback, which was in Roger and Whitebeard's prime. He was considered the strongest pirate. Now, some of you may be asking, well, if he's the strongest pirate, doesn't that mean that he's stronger than Rocks, who was also a pirate? No, because he was the strongest pirate after Rocks' death. There's nothing that tells us he was ever called the strongest pirate during Rocks' life, and we actually know that Whitebeard didn't reach his prime until 38, which was after Rocks' death. That would put Whitebeard over Roger with Rocks over Whitebeard. So that could be the potential hierarchy here. It would make sense if it is confirmed that Garp and Roger were both needed to take on Rocks. Now, there does seem to be some progression that could have transpired where Roger and Garp could have gotten stronger later, but the statement wouldn't really be debunked by that because you could just still argue that their combined force was above any singular upgrade that either of them got. And the way that you'd argue for Garp getting stronger is like Chinjiao training, all these other things. But again, it really wouldn't matter. Again, here we do see the same image that Sengoku showed, but we obviously know that's not the real context here. And basically it just reiterates his aim was to become the king of the world, the worst taboo. So you could argue for sure that Rocks is the strongest of the old generation. We're going to need more clarity on the actual feats to find out what truly transpired at God Valley. We know the people that were there, but we don't know the specific matchups and fights that took place. We don't know the context and how he was defeated. It's also possible that Whitebeard potentially turned on Rocks. We've gotten a lot of foreshadowing to that potentially because he obviously didn't like what happened to Loki this chapter where he stabbed a kid. He obviously didn't like being considered a follower of Rocks. We saw that in chapter 1096. It's possible that Rocks did something that Whitebeard thought was so heinous that he had to flip on him, and potentially he helped take him down as well. All these things will have to be fleshed out to us in the future. But lastly, I wanted to circle back to Loki and the statement here that he made about if he had encountered the Holy Knights, that would have meant that he most likely infiltrated the Holy Land and thus could have achieved his goal of becoming king of the world. This is super interesting because obviously we know that that was Rock's greatest ambition, to become king of the world. With Loki and Blackbeard now, we have two characters that are very important to the end of the story, as we see what looks to be somebody with very clear resemblance to Loki in the big mural that was revealed a couple chapters back in the final war, having heavy influence from Rocks. Blackbeard, of course, named his ship the Saber of Xebec. Odie even answered a question this past year about this, to which he was very non-committal with an answer and seemed to deflect, as he said, well, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it isn't. But in Road to Laughdale, I believe that there is another statement that questions the connection there. We saw Van Augur make the proclamation to Saturn that they want the world. Rock's ambitions will live on through this next generation, through both Loki and Blackbeard. Loki may be swayed to Luffy's side, but Blackbeard surely will stay resolute. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about Rocks. Do you think he is the strongest in the One Piece verse? And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.